public, yeah. A lot of COVID messenger type stuff.
Wait,
Yeah.
No,
I figured it out.
I didn't really register his name. I really thought that people, I mean, specifically for COVID, they were more interested about how it spreads or how it gets in or about.
Oh, no, I had a podcast for like, I interviewed scientists every week for probably 8 years leading up to that. Never, I don't think I ever once had a negative review. I had
It's the background too.
neurologist and stuff drove down in COVID. People were getting death threats. Like, I would have to, I had to like be careful. And not just mine. I mean, people would go on. I mean, it was like it became this whole situation. Like people would go on like the local news to like explain things, and someone would find their like information, and like because there's a lot of the conspiracy stuff being.
Hi.
And, a lot of people were making it sudden.
Yo, Emily, what's up?
Nice to see you.
Don't mean to interrupt you.
Well, yeah, so in terms of next steps,
I think we
I'm kind of, so I was in the climate space for a bit.
You think that because you didn't RSVP?
I think wait, Dara,
Okay, well, I agree, but
I missed the very first part of
Oh yeah, it's right away, right? You know. If people if it gets like crazy packed for the second half, like for the 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. slot, well then we can put that. We just figure out how to prioritize our people.
you're headed up then, if you have to kick people out, you can kick people out.
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll take care of it.
That is why do you have this with hand back? It takes up me.
Does it matter?
Yeah, it takes up just some economy.
It's not any money to you. It's not any skin. Don't, whatever.
Money could have been doing.
Yeah, we can just wait.
Because what into the, oh, yeah.
Testing. Testing.
She said she was coming from Providence.
Yeah, she's doing research on Providence.
Yeah.
But that should be down to talk next year.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah,
Doing
she's. Yeah.
Testing. Dang, that is booming. Testing. Test. Is it too loud?
Because there's a high.
Is it too loud? Because
There's cost without
Hello?
reward.
Is that too loud? Well, I don't know. I don't typically use a mic.
That sounds good to me. That sounds kind of fun.
Doesn't sound bad.
Yeah, I'll go far back. Let me see what's up.
I followed every member of our club, and I got the same answer from all of them. I'll be late.
That's how it goes.
I'll be late.
We're gonna begin very
We'll be late.
shortly. People always come and go, so let's say T-minus 3 minutes. 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Glad you're here, Cyrus. Glad you're talking.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Yeah. Yeah. I love all the like the theory stuff.
Yeah, liberty is a nice issue to explore.
Yeah. And I love positive negative liberty.
When you say futility is.
I feel like America tends to undervalue
Futility is.
very biased towards.
Okay.
No,
2 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, the liberty of faith, everyone now.
Yeah, we need more positive.
Everyone and positive aspect, other so it's very well known.
Nice to see you, Paul. Thank you for coming.
Contributive, connective, yeah. Which I think psychedelics are very good for that sort of thing, connection, even responsibility.
Yeah.
You know?
More active people.
Yeah.
The absence of effort.
Yeah.
Simply, don't bother me.
Yeah.
Don't bother me.
Yeah. We need the fusion approach.
But it's not only, I think it's not only not bother me, but freedom for duration.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally.
this is the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that very much.
No, thank you.
Right here for the Psychedelics panel? Awesome, yeah, welcome in. We start late all the time, so you're right on time.
That's what the goal, right?
What's that?
That's what the goal.
What's the goal?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
so that is even this
Yes,
and there's a lot of
it's something that because you articulate it as a funded with the phrase, they plug into existing, professed beliefs about liberty that might have for national reasons or for identity reasons or for, or just for pure human awesomeness reasons too. Yeah, but in the discourse it helps to have a phrase like that.
Yeah, no, and to be aware of how the narratives are moving.
Yes.
Right? And
Right.
Sometimes the risk is getting trapped.
Yeah. Yeah.
Getting safe. Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. And now, it's a very controversial topic. Psychedelics are, one of the options always an issue.
It's gonna be exciting. Chase, what do you think?
I think
I'd rather.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's gonna be fun.
Definitely drop the email and let his knowledge.
You want to start?
And we can probably go over some 30 if we need to. Like, anything else that we find, right? No, we can say.
we're gonna stop right around there.
Okay, cool. Closed session.
I wish we could.
From what? The door? Yeah, figure it out.
We've got a good audience on live. Already about 100 there. So, I expect that to increase quite a bit. I will do a little bit. This one is more open, but it's gonna be good.
Okay.
I figure I'll do a very short intro and then we'll give it to you.
Great.
Get your poison.
Thanks for the water.
This on.
It's like nice and green and
Flooring, start with in-house, but you can share it too. I am totally fine with that. So be my guest. Nice. You guys are more. Okay. Yeah. Cool. I'll go ahead and do a small intro. My name is Chase Bourbon. I am co-president of the Harvard Undergraduate Psychedelics Club. We're very happy that you guys decided to come out tonight. We've got a couple special events coming up in the next couple hours, starting with this wonderful panel of audience members behind me. Special thank you to everyone for coming out today on very short notice and making something awesome come together. I also want to shout out the Mahindra Humanities Center at Harvard for helping fund this event and make sure that we can bring some of our members and find spaces to do so. I also want to shout out Mogu, a company based in LA that helped us secure some of our members here today. And finally, I want to shout out SSDP, Psychedelics Today, and Psychedelics USA for getting our live stream option available tonight. All these moving parts, all these wonderful people playing a role tonight is truly wonderful, and it's very exciting to see it come together. So I thank you very much, and I'm going to pass it on to our host, Shane Mausse.
All right. Keep going for Chase, by the way, and Harvard Undergraduate Psychedelics Society Club. All right. Society one day, keep growing. My name's Shane Mausse. I guess my career is now at the kind of intersection of comedy, science, and psychedelics. I have a science podcast, completely unrelated to psychedelics, but usually about perception. And I'm a stand-up comedian, and I've been doing psychedelics for 30 years, in case you couldn't tell from all of this get up. And so I've seen the space change quite a bit. And so today we're going to have kind of a general discussion from different points of view, and we'll leave some time at the end for opening up for questions. But I will be doing a comedy show after this, so this is, I get to stretch my science legs a little bit with this. Well, we're going to be kind of talking about perception, consciousness, sense of self, identity type stuff from the point of view from neuroscience, from the realm of from a spiritual point of view, cultural, and from art and storytelling as well. And we have 4 amazing guests that I'm going to have introduce themselves in a moment. A little bit, I'll give myself a little introduction while kind of introducing where we find ourselves in the psychedelic space. So I started my comedy career. I'm from Wisconsin originally. I came to Boston 21 years ago. I started comedy in Harvard Square at the Comedy Studio. Caught some breaks early on and everything, but I even in my first year of comedy, I remember having some psychedelic jokes and everything. It was like such a very edgy, taboo subject back then. I remember 2007, I did my first psychedelic joke on late night TV, and it was, oh my gosh, the FCC was getting involved. It was for the most adorable joke too. It was a joke about how I had eaten mushrooms, wandered into a Best Buy, and unknowingly found myself in the camcorder department and thought I was watching a movie about me watching a movie about me. And a silly, adorable little joke. I had to fight with the government for months to be able to tell that cute little 20-second joke on the late night with Conan, like the edgy late night show back then. And I saw, so there's a lot of taboo early on. I did my first psychedelic tour back in 2016. And it was, oh my gosh, I can't believe people are talking about this psychedelic stuff. And then Michael Pollan's book came out right after my tour had ended. And so I got to see what things were like before and after his book. This bestseller, suddenly psychedelic literature wasn't relegated to the dark corners of the bookstore where you'd have to feel like you were asking for porn or something like that, trying to find a Terence McKenna book or something. This was front and center, and it got normalized in such a big way. Oprah 25 years ago famously had an episode. She had kind of some of, we'll just say some bad information, talking about holes in the brain from MDMA. And then just a couple months ago, she had Michael Pollan on talking about the new potential for psychedelics. So things have changed quite a bit in the last 30 years by evidence of we're now in Harvard instead of psychedelics being like this Cheech and Chong stonery kind of jokes, that now we're getting to have conversations about perception and consciousness and spirituality and culture. And I think that is a positive direction. I think it's really going, I think next year there's going to be 20 people here, guys. This stuff.
Don't forget the online viewers, man.
And 150 online. Let's shoot for the moon. And so with that, I just want to say because I actually I'm very excited about where we're at. I'm excited that we get to have conversations like we're having today. I actually think it would be easy for younger people to take it for granted because it hasn't always been this way. And so with that, we're going to get into having each of the guests introduce themselves. Tristan, do you want to go first?
I'm Tristan, you're Florian.
You go.
You go, but
Go.
you're Florian.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I
So
looked at my
Shane,
thing wrong.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'm Florian Engert, and I was told by
Can I just say,
Shane that he has a problem with names and with introducing people. And we even wanted him to introduce us first, but it was going to be a disaster, so that's why we decided to introduce ourselves. And I think it was a good idea. We already walked into that.
I just got done spending 10 minutes explaining, like, I can't introduce you guys, I can't do names, I screw it up every time. And right on cue. All right, sorry.
Yes, I'm Florian Engert. I teach neuroscience here at Harvard, and I started as a physicist in Germany. So my original major was in physics and a little bit in philosophy. And I switched from physics to biology and neuroscience during my PhD. And I think my whole approach to psychedelics and perception and consciousness is really firmly anchored in a mechanistic understanding. So my goal from the beginning to now was to try to explain the brain and the mind and the human mind in the context of mechanistic biology and evolution. So the two things are important here. I believe that for any questions that might come up, I think there in principle should be a reductionist mechanistic explanation based on biology and biophysics. And I also think that this is probably explainable through the trajectory of minds through evolution, which also means that humans are not special. I don't think we are special. I think we are just at the last step of evolution through all other animal models. So anything we try to discuss here and today, I think, should relate also to what mice and fish and monkeys and any animal might experience, perceive, or be conscious of. My model organism is the baby fish, a baby zebrafish, and you can see here on my t-shirt, I have a cartoon of a fish here. It's a fish, it's a muscle fish, and above it says, you need to harden the fuck up. On the back of my shirt, it says, do you know what you need to do? And the front is harden the fuck up. This t-shirt, I wear that in the lab whenever there are whiny grad students or postdocs that come to me and ask me what they should be doing. Now I can just point if you're struggling with anything. So that's the motto in my lab. With that, I'll next panelist.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Tara Dionoth. I'm a board certified chaplain, a word that means a lot in the Harvard divinity space. I think there are a few people from the divinity school here, but maybe a little bit more of a nebulous word in a more general setting. So chaplaincy is usually thought of as someone who works in a religious or spiritual setting, or in a non-religious or spiritual setting, but does religious or spiritual work. So a lot of the work that I do in the hospital context is really working with people in all facets of their life. So oftentimes our patients are coming to us with hard diagnoses, hard treatment decisions, nearing end of life, serious mental illnesses. So we're working with patients across all of those different types of demographics and populations. The work I do specifically within psychedelics is related to ketamine. So at the hospital, we have a ketamine clinic, and we work specifically with patients with treatment-resistant depression. So this has been approved to be used in the medical context. And it's been an interesting, I love that I'm sitting next to Florian and thinking about the reductionist model. The model that we work from is really the subjective model. So what is happening to the patients when they're undergoing the ketamine treatment? And how can that subjective experience be able to, how can we make sense of it so that we can understand ways that we can improve outcomes, help people make meaning out of those experiences, and just have someone there to accompany them through those difficult moments of life, especially when it relates to treatment-resistant depression, can be an incredibly isolating, lonely, an experience where you're not really able to connect well with others because of the symptomatology of depression. So our chaplains are really trained to sit with and sit in the midst of the suffering that our patients are undergoing and to support them through the ketamine experiences that they have. So that's a little bit about the work that I do. And I'll pass it over to you next, Tristan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tristan Angeri, and I am a writer,
And I'm also trained in architecture and psychedelic assisted therapy. I'm as a therapist, but through my ministerial work, I'm also a student at Harvard Divinity School, where I'm getting my master's in theological studies with a focus on religion, ethics, and politics. And at the Center for the Study of World Religions, I lead a reading group called Psychedelics and Aesthetics. My primary interests in psychedelics are the kinds of perceptual differences that change the way people have psychedelic experiences, as well as the environments in which people trip, and how those material influences really impact the experiences that people have. I'm also very interested in art and material culture. In the reading group, we've been looking at different artistic precedents from around the world in the way that different cultures prepare, use, and think about their psychedelic experiences, and the materials and artifacts that they leave behind sometimes as clues for us to try and understand how, for instance, the Vedic Sanskrit peoples consumed soma, or the Olmec interacted with Bufo or Bufo marinus, not Alvarius, since it's a different geography, but these toads and the art that they created to create iconography about those very special animals and the relationship that they had with them through their secretions. So those are a little bit about my interests, and I'll pass it over to Osiris.
Hello, everyone. My name is Osiris Inoue Gonzalez Romero. I come from Mexico. I have a background in philosophy and in Mesoamerican studies. And my main interest in psychedelics is to study the philosophical uses of psychedelics, which is not very common in the psychedelic space. The main use recognized are therapeutic or sacramental uses. The last Tuesday, I shared with you a talk on cognitive liberty and the psychedelic humanities. So to argue that it's possible to talk about philosophical uses of psychedelics, first of all, it's necessary to recognize that the psychedelic experience is a source of knowledge and not only a series of hallucinations. What kind of knowledge? Knowledge of the brain, which is a realm in which neuroscience provides insightful information. Knowledge of the self, which is completely different of the knowledge of the brain. It's not a mechanistic explanation of the function of the self. And remember that the self-knowledge is the principle of Western philosophy. Socrates, in this Greek word, the noctis auton, the self of the knowledge, ground the philosophical exercise in this knowledge. And third, the knowledge of the relationship between human beings and nature, which it's possible to call ecology, or the relationship between human beings and the world. So it's possible to talk about ontology. In other words, the relationship between human beings and the different entities. All of you that are familiar with the DMT experiences, some people talk about entities, right? But what is entity? What about entities? And none of them are philosophers. So as a philosophers, our goal is to address entities. Right? On the other hand, I have a background in Mesoamerican studies. Now I am lecturing a course on psychedelics and religion, indigenous traditions of the Americas. I am carrying out a project on indigenous medicine and psilocybin mushroom rituals in Mesoamerica. So here in Harvard now I am becoming the mushroom man, right? Because I am focusing in this project. It's an historical project. I am working in the archive, in the collection, Tina and Robert Gordon Wasson, and I encourage you to visit these collections. You have a very beautiful and unique materials, and there is a walking distance from here or from your place. And now I am performing this. And my goal, for example, regarding consciousness, also as an historian, is philosophy and history are also psychedelics because both are useful to extend consciousness. Philosophy is useful to extend consciousness. This is an argument coined by Peter Josted, a British philosopher who teach in the University of Exeter in the UK. They have a master in psychedelics. So this is one of the main ideas that I want to highlight with you. So I am glad to share this panel, and I am really glad to join this conversation with everyone.
Wonderful. I'm very fascinated by, I'd really like to talk about kind of the differences in points of view, in interpretations of as you said, kind of, some people would write them off as hallucinations. Other people interpret some of these experiences as, like you've opened up this filter that so you can tap into something that is out there, some universal consciousness. Other folks would talk about kind of the emergent evolutionary underpinnings that might give rise to certain maybe archetypes in the mind or something. And since you mentioned history, I'm wondering if anyone or all of you could speak to how different cultures and societies have influenced our very interpretations of it. Like, for example, we can do ketamine in clinics because it was a Schedule 3 because of the historic medical use of it, and I think it's protected under international law, right? Because it's a useful anesthetic on battlefields and such. And so, and then along the way, people are like, "Hey, I got less depressed after that surgery. What's going on with that?" And then we explore it for surgery itself, and so ketamine, which is like a very extreme experience, I would say, is something that we associate with like a clinical thing. Whereas if you're seeing some indigenous people secrete things from a toad and smoking some toad venom and having an experience, we view it just drastically different. In my view, we're all having some sort of experience that is outside of normal consciousness. So how does each of you go about interpreting those experiences? Yes.
Well, to continue and pass the word, I forgot to mention, for example, that one analogy between psychedelics and history, it's, of course, history and philosophy are useful to extend your consciousness, and historical consciousness is useful for psychedelics, right? It's important to extend your consciousness, right, and have the knowledge of the previous cultural uses. This is the other word that I want to highlight. There are several cultural uses of psychedelics, and unfortunately, the United Nations World Drug Report in the sections on psychedelics only recognize sacramental, medical, and non-medical uses. This narrow framework, for example, causes a lot of problems, right? Because if you have rubbish frameworks, you will develop rubbish public policies, as happens nowadays everywhere, right? Not only here, in every place in the world, the public policies regarding psychedelics and psychoactive substances are a mess, right? Due to the lack of recognition of these cultural uses. Also, there are some pseudo problems related with cultural appropriation, right? Which is different from respect, recognition, and reciprocity, because these problems regarding cultural appropriation usually are related with a lack of recognition of different cultural uses. Indigenous peoples or non-indigenous cultures along history have been used psychedelics in a different way. Nowadays, we are not using peyote to hunt deers, right? Which was one of the main uses 2,000, 3,000 years ago. Now we are using psychedelics for other purposes. So the thing that I want to highlight is that the cultural uses are evolving, right? According to our needs. So it's important to take into account our needs to avoid misunderstanding, recognize the different cultural uses, and of course historical consciousness, because without history, we will be functional illiterate.
And now people are using the same substances to try to come up with a new app for Silicon Valley.
Or enhancement.
It goes from having this transformative experience to microdosing being all the rage. It's like just enough of a mind manifesting thing to not feel my mind manifests in any way. So all that is to say is it seems like there's these things are always shifting and influenced by culture.
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind when you asked that question was the fact that at least the contemporary medicinal psychedelic movement is over-indexing perhaps on the mental or mind aspects of these substances, even in the name psychedelic, mind manifesting. And what I'm really interested in and researching are not just the way that your mind trips, but like, how does your foot trip? How do your lungs trip? How do the different parts of your body respond to this matter that you're consuming by any number of routes of administration, whether you're sniffing it or smoking it or boofing it or tasting it and eating it. Those routes of administration have to do with the different parts of your body and the way that those parts of your body perceive things. And once they, of course, get into your, chemically into your body, a lot is happening neurochemically. But I'm really interested in the ways that the body appreciates the drug throughout the body, not only in the nervous system and the brain. And yeah, I'm really interested in the way that the whole body trips.
I'd love to respond to this question around culture and kind of pick up a little bit on what you were sharing with Sirius there. Peyote dating back 2,000, 3,000 years, ketamine dating back 50 years. And if we look back to, I believe, like the mid-2000s, when scientists were just thinking about what is the use of ketamine within the treatment-resistant depression population, there's actually a lot of concern about the psychedelic and dissociative effect of ketamine. And so in order to have the impact that they wanted, so they wanted to reduce the depression symptomatology, they wanted to reduce suicidality, but they didn't want patients to have the psychedelic effect. So what they would do, I'm kind of making up these numbers, let's say you needed 10 of ketamine in your system in order to have a reduction in your symptomatology, but 10 give you the dissociative effect. The scientists then would say, okay, we're gonna give you 5 on one day, come back again to the clinic later in the week, we're gonna give you 5 again, but with that 5, you're not gonna get the dissociative effect. You're just gonna get the reduction in symptomatology. So right from the jump, when this medicine was being studied for depression, it was with a lot of suspicion around the psychedelic effect and the dissociative properties of ketamine. Despite their best efforts to not have dissociation happen, patients were still having trip-like experiences. And we see that in the clinic, we see that and this is the reason that psychedelic chaplaincy is happening in the clinic, because our medical director had said our patients are having these experiences, they're having these experiences of wonder, of awe, of transcendence, they're feeling like they're outside of their bodies, looking at their bodies, they're feeling like something new is happening in that space, and they want to make meaning out of it. They want somebody to talk to about it, and they want to find ways to integrate what is happening in the treatment experience into their daily life. So despite best efforts to not create dissociation, even with the treatment dosages that we're at today, with the intent of not creating dissociation, it still is happening. So despite best efforts, we're seeing that.
I have so many things. So it's very funny that I mean, you know, the FDA evaluates something like MDMA and goes like, well, that's great. Let's help the veterans, but can we like take the fun out of it? Is there any way that we can like do it without it being, but like that's the goal? If we can, but it's I wonder if I'm being like, you know, too hard. I mean, part of the issue with these things is that when you're talking about disassociating or bringing an ecstatic experience to it, something like a regulatory body has a hard time teasing apart the variables that are at work, right? And so this, if there's never been a precedent for this substance plus this experience or therapy, like how do you evaluate that? Right? Well, reductionist.
Yeah, so I realized that currently we are talking more about the normative aspect, namely should we take them or shouldn't we, and should the regulations in place that govern whether we take it or not. And I think that got me thinking is that a lot of people here probably want to take it, and so they're doing it because they're predicting a certain experience. I was much more interested in what it actually does to your mind, your perception, and your cognitive state, rather than the question whether I'm trying to get something out of it.
Yeah.
I think they're both, of course, critical, but with respect to the regulation and policies and whether we should or shouldn't, and whether they're in place and whether they have changed over in different cultures and in different histories, I haven't really thought deeply about that, and I don't have an opinion. The one thing I can say is there is probably a certain danger to taking it. There's a certain risk. And then one can all discuss whether it should then be regulated or not. Are people, should they be allowed to risk themselves or not? I tend to say, no, you shouldn't. I mean, it's my responsibility and my choice. And the other aspect is the addictive property, right? I think usually what they're trying to regulate is remove the addictive properties. And I think that's useful to do is because there's a real danger.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the aspects in trying to get the fun out of it.
Yeah.
And when it's medical, is to remove the addictive properties.
Right.
I think there's something about that.
Yeah.
It's not all just Anglo-Saxon Puritan take the joy, which I hate. I'm totally on your side, Shane. Right? I think that especially in the States, there is a certain antagonism to anything that's fun. We are Americans deeply suspicious about anything that's just fun, right?
Yeah.
And we want to dampen that down. And that I think is bullshit. I think we should do away with that. But the addictive aspect, I think for psychedelics are not really all that addictive.
So I have a
against
question.
regulation.
So I have a question for you. So this is just a button-up policy. So I tend to I don't know where I stand other than I do think Schedule 2 would at least make it easier for scientists to study things without necessarily changing any laws in any meaningful way. So more relevant to your work, why? So one of the number one questions that I get from people. So I mean, I think people have this face value idea of hallucination as this like crazy, wild, unpredictable thing. So one of these counterintuitive things people ask is, why are people having these similar experiences? They're often calling them shared experiences. What's going on there?
Yes, here I think I can speak to that. I believe that a large aspect of neuroscience is in left field. I think when we think about how the mind works, how the brain works from a classic neuroscience perspective, we think that sensory information is being integrated through the sensory organs or from the body. It's being sent to the brain, then it's processed, and then behavior comes out. I think this is fundamentally flawed. I think all brains in all animals, including humans, start not with a sensory experience, it starts with a simulation. I think brains are prediction and simulation engines. So any thought in any animal, any neural activity, starts with a prediction about what should be happening in the world. And then the animal, including humans, will compare that prediction with incoming sensory information. That's secondary. And only if there's a mismatch between the two, will we become conscious, aware, perceive, and then act on that, on these error signals, these mismatch. But what dominates perception, even sensory perception and consciousness, is a simulation, is a prediction, is a dream, is a hallucination. So my answer to your question is we are hallucinating everything. Everything we perceive is primarily a hallucination, and occasionally we cross-check that with incoming sensory information. I think that's the shared experience maybe. I think what psychedelics do, they just shift the balance a little bit between, they boost the simulation engine, give it a slight edge, and might overemphasize that over incoming sensory information. I think you're just tuning it a little bit. It's not that psychedelics generate hallucinations, they're just allowing us to hallucinate a little bit more than we generally and usually do. How about that, Jane?
Well, then I'm curious what your definition is between obviously I think we kind of all understand that our perceptions are generally inaccurate, but how do you differentiate between a hallucination and just a difference in a what am I trying to say? Just an approximation. So right now I feel like I have an approximation of the environment, whereas a lot of people would say, like, say, a closed eye visual qualitatively feels very different than the sort of experience
I think that's an illusion. That's actually a misperception.
Yeah.
The idea that you close your eyes and you imagine the room, that's a very different experience than just perceiving the room in your eye. If I'm watching this room with my eyes open, I'm not processing and seeing shit. I have my phobia that processes a tiny little bit. I'm actually hallucinating everything here, and I'm cross-checking in intervals. I'm just matching, and I'm checking that this is all correct. That's what's happening. And the difference between a perception and a hallucination is that the perception usually gets confirmed every second. So whenever I'm scanning, I keep this mismatched signal small. If you're dreaming at night, you don't have this different experience. It actually feels very, very real. And I think what's happening right now, I'm dreaming, you guys, and I'm cross-checking it with the sensory and it matches. And that's why it feels real. A hallucination, I think, is something when you occasionally get these large mismatch signals, when your perception and your sensory incoming stream and your simulation are at odds. And then you have a different experience, then it feels weird, right? Because you're getting these constant mismatch signals. And I think that's maybe the shared experience with people who are tripping. They're getting this increased rate of error signals that now just make things feel weird.
Yeah. So like, say I'm on mushrooms right now, and there's some glitter around the chairs or something like that. Are you saying that perhaps is it like we're filtering just different levels of what's the term when you like put circuits together and then you have like a new level of analysis or the word that I'm trying to
it's almost like you introduced
it's a simpler word than that. It'll come to me. But like a level of percent. So like
different levels of perception.
Yeah.
Dimensions. Well, I think what's happening if you're tripping and you're seeing weird shit happening, I think that's primarily your simulation engine going on overdrive, and then your sensory match process just occasionally, maybe even being totally overridden by that, right? That your whole thought process is now dominated by the simulation engine, and what's coming in, the mismatch signals might be ignored. Then you have a card carrying hallucination. But the glitter that might show up and disappear, I think, could be when the two systems are just fighting each other. One dominates, the other one.
I have a question. Is it sort of like you're sampling the incoming sensory information according to heuristic that you have, a heuristic sampling,
No,
and then it's sort of like a parallax or something where you're like picking up other things, and
I think the heuristic is preloaded already. I think that's true. I think you have your simulation that biases what you're sampling and where you're going, and usually it's to check, it's cross-checking, right? Whether your simulation is actually accurate or not. And that's what determines the heuristic or your bias or where your attention, when you're attending to something or focusing on something, that's already predetermined by whichever simulation engine is uploaded in your mind currently. And to me, that's to a large degree predetermined by evolution, what you're capable of simulating. And then, of course, it's informed in humans, at least, by your past experience. That, I think, biases your heuristic or your sampling bias.
Yeah, I'm imagining like if my vision were mediated as like a Photoshop filter, like I only see in half tone usually, and then taking the drug makes me see in mezzotint, and so I'm getting this weird, like.
You know, talking about vision and visual, I mean, we as primates, we are dominated by vision. But if you talk to blind people, actually, I don't know whether there's a lot of research on tripping in blind people. How do they trip?
Well, they have like Charles Bonnet syndrome and stuff, right, where they have. I mean, it might be a similar thing where the idea is that they have hallucinations. Some people that weren't born blind but go blind. It's kind of like the like if you put your car away in storage, you'd fire up the engine from time to time so that things don't atrophy.
But let's talk about congenitally blind people,
yeah,
which I think have exactly the same card-carrying, conscious, perceptual experience that we do. They just simulate the world in a different modality. It's not visual; it is just probably haptic, auditory, but they can generate the world as a simulation. It's just not based on vision. And it's the same idea. It's you're not simulating images. You're simulating the world. You're simulating objects, other people, and you're simulating your own interaction with the world, which is not necessarily based on vision. It can be anything. It can be any modality. To me, one of the most fascinating people to think about it is Helen Keller, who was basically born when she became blind and deaf when she was 16 months old. So her whole perceptual experience, her whole consciousness is neither based on vision nor on speech, on language, but I think it's just as genuine and real, and I think it's similar. It's exactly similar to yours and mine. It's a shared conscious experience of the world, which is not based on either vision or language. It's based on something else, and I think that is the experience that we all have. It's based on being able to interact and engage the world.
Sir.
Yes, regarding hallucinations, I will make an approach as a philosopher. And one of the things that I noticed in the literature from the past 7 years is a misuse of the term hallucination. Right? It's a mess because there are several technical issues involved. Right? When we are talking about psychedelics, we are talking about visions, not hallucinations. And I want to address this point from two perspectives. From the perspective of a poet, right? And another more technical one. And for example, regarding hallucination, it's very insightful, the book of Baudelaire, The Artificial Paradises. And for example, Baudelaire argued that there is not, in a strict sense, hallucination, as it's understood in the medical realm. When we are talking about, for example, hashish, right? We are talking about, for example, the exacerbate use of imagination, right? So Baudelaire argues that it's not only the hallucination, but it's the active use of the imagination that it's working, because we tend to hide the role of the function of the imagination as a human faculty during the psychedelic experience, right? This is because, for example, the creative and aesthetic uses face lack of recognition. imagination is a human faculty shared by everyone. And for example, Jose Luis Diaz, a Mexican neuroscientist, very well known for his work on Salvia divinorum, he argues that the most interesting effect of the psychedelics, of these neurotropic molecules, are their effects on the imagination. Right? Yeah.
Absolutely right.
Right.
So I would say the differentiation between hallucination and imagination, or even perception, is weak and shouldn't really be, that's a wrong definition. I think a hallucination is something that we maybe clinically define as something that's not real. So we pretend we can distinguish between the real and the not real, and I think that's the illusion.
Yeah.
It's just a resonance. I think the reality is just another hallucination or imagination. It's using exactly what you said. We are using our imagination, which I think is running this this prediction engine.
This is, for example, the approach of a poet, right? Let me share with you the approach of a hardcore philosopher, right? For example, Hegel. Hegel has the concept of objective reality. If I make a statement, for example, a purple dragon is crossing the door now. This sentence has no backup in reality, right?
Correct.
There is no purple dragon going into the room now, right? It's not back in reality, right? It's not back in truth. So one of the things of hallucination is that hallucinations are not back in objective reality. There is not a reference, right? And finally, the third critical point, it's a technical one. For example, Schulze Hoffman in the book, The Plans of God, they use the term hallucinogens, right? And they argue, well, we will use the term hallucinogens because it's the most common term now, not because it's the most accurate, right? And there is a technical issue which is interesting. Psychedelics, except Iboga, has no lethal dose, right?
Has no what?
Lethal dose,
Oh, wow.
right? And on the other hand, the hallucinogens work in different neuroreceptors, right? Scopolamine, it's a different type of alkaloids, and it's a serious thing because the active dose, it's very close to the lethal dose, right? In true hallucinogens, as daturas, brugmansias, right? For example, the active dose is 2 milligrams, and the lethal dose is 2.5. So the difference, the distinction, it's important. It's not only a theoretical or a technical or a speculative definition. Establish the difference between psychedelics and hallucinogens. It's very important because it could be a death or life question, right? It's not only a speculative term, but also it's a technical one, right? Hallucinogens are not the same as psychedelics because work in different parts of the body, in different neuroreceptors, and there are lethal. And the lethal dose, it's very close to the active dose. In the case of psilocybin, for example, or mescaline, well, perhaps you can eat 30 pairs of fresh psilocybin mushrooms, yeah, as Maria Sabina in her first healing experience. And of course, this will be an heroic dose, but there is not a risk of physical death, right? Of course, there will be transformation in the mind and so on. And finally, I want to highlight that also psychedelics have therapeutic properties to treat different ailments, not only related with mind or with the psyche. For example, Ribia corimbosa or Tubina corimbosa, or Luluki, a brother of LSD, is useful, for example, to treat the ailments of syphilis, right? It's used in ethnogynecology, right? So the word psychedelics, of course, it's related with the mind, but as Tristan argued, is not only mind manifesting, but also it's related with other parts of the body. This is the thing that I want to highlight, because the distinction between psychedelic and hallucinogen, it's not a speculative one. You know, it's a technical one, and you know, the thing which is in the middle is the human life.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious how you guys think about because we're using physical feedback, but then there's all these cognitive biases and stuff where, you know, we maybe overestimate our confidence in things, or see someone attractive and we have these halo effects, or things like that suddenly you do a psychedelic and some of those filters can actually go away. You might have a more accurate perception of some. You might become free of some of the patterns about yourself that you had previously. So like it's very misleading to call it a hallucination.
If I may, a metaphor I really like is one of imagining the mind as lots of different paths that you travel, and you take a psychedelic and it's like a blizzard, and so you can't see any of those paths anymore. And then at least with ketamine, for I believe it's like the next 72 hours, the mind is especially neuroplastic, especially subjective. And that's a time when you can sort of start to carve new neural pathways, and being able to work with a chaplain, with a psychotherapist can be a really foundational time to think about how might those parts of my life that feel like they've been so entrenched and I can't get out of the grooves that I'm in, how can I carve some new pathways there? Something that we hear from our patients at times is this idea of, and they don't necessarily use this language, but this idea that the ketamine is inducing an altered state. But what could it mean if if we are living in the altered state? And what ketamine is inducing, what the psychedelic is inducing, is actually the state at which they want to be at more often. So for some of our patients who have these heart-opening experiences, these divine encounters, these ways of, oftentimes I'm thinking of a particular patient who feels especially more connected to their community, to other people, feels a sense of there's real meaning in the world because I can connect to others. And then when the ketamine starts to wear off in the way that he would describe it, that connection gets lost. And so he's feeling like, okay, now I'm in the altered state because I can't feel those connections. But when I'm in the ketamine state, I actually am in the right state of the world. I'm in my right mind. So what is the imaginative world and what is the real world, at least in terms of how we subjectively engage with our reality? It's an interesting one to think about in terms of, like, I think a spiritual perspective and a subjective perspective, just as it relates to the patient that's taking these drugs.
I think that's a beautiful analogy. I think that it's useful here to bring back this idea of a simulation engine, that the mind is a simulation engine, not a input machine. And that engine is an interconnected, extremely complex network that will resonate, and that can resonate in different states, and it can get stuck. It can have attractive states where it's hard to get out. I think what ketamine can do, it can help relax that and allow the system now to wander more freely between states. And that has the flavor of hallucinations, right? Or something that's just less conform to what the similar states would be that are dictated by incoming information. I really like your analogy. I think this idea that you can have this simulation engine be in some attractive state, or in a few. And it might also slide back into those. And then what you need to get out of that is some change in the dynamics, change the shape of this attractive state landscape. It's also what Tristan was saying previously, is the input from the body, or the effects that you have on the autonomic nervous system, which constantly monitors, simulates, and gets input from all of your organs. And so any drug that can change not just the brain, but can change the signals that are being sent from your body to the network can also move these locked practice states around. So I like that.
So I wanted to, I thought of the word I was looking for, which kind of, I think, clarifies things and is related to art. Not to have to bring it back, but it's just the levels of abstraction in the mind, where in my view of thinking, we kind of have an archetype of a perfect table or something in our heads, where if I were to close my eyes, it's meeting some disagreement here. The idea is that like you might need to show a computer every possible table that there ever was for it to brute force go through all those photos to be like, that's a table that you have there, at least early computers. But our minds can see, I've never seen a table exactly like that before with the little round thing in the beginning. My brain isn't like, what the heck is that thing? It's very easy to understand that it's a table because it's making use of kind of a template in my mind, and the reason why it's relevant is because if you're drawing and you're making lines of a picture and then putting in some shade and then coloring things in, you might eventually get a full scene. But if you interrupt that somewhere with a drug, for instance, perhaps you'd be seeing a more raw version of the process, and that might be why people are seeing things that are like, think like emojis, where it's like we have this simple idea like, yeah, that's a happy one or that's a sad one. No, does any of that make any sense to anybody?
No, I think it makes a lot of sense, but I think it's wrong. No, it's not wrong. But I think the idea that we take images in through the eyes, and that they then get compared to templates. I think the template idea is absolutely correct. I just don't think that the templates have the form of images. I think the templates have the form of a resonance, of the ability to resonate, to respond to something, to multimodal incoming information. So a table is not just an image or a different form of images. I think a table is something you interact with. I think also blind people, again, like coming back to blind people, have an image. It's not an image, it's a concept of a template of a table. Yeah. And I think they would recognize the same, they would effortlessly recognize it the same way you do. I think the only issue here is the templates are much more abstract than images. And that's true, that's a level of abstraction that you are talking about. And I think that's absolutely accurate, that the way you can take information, well, first of all, the way you can conjure up these abstract templates in your mind, I think that's pre-configured and hardwired. We can hallucinate or we can imagine a table or anything effortlessly. And if you look at it, what happens, you're matching this to your template. This thing that's coming in through your multimodal senses. And what this thing is doing, it's just making your very abstracted template resonate. And that's when you think you have the perception of a table. I think that's not exclusive to humans. Any animal can do that.
Right.
And I think that's the abstraction that exists.
Yeah.
And that exists in all animals. And I think every thought is already at that level of abstraction.
Yeah, like what I'm saying, like if you were to stimulate the right part of any primates and a lot of other species' brains, they would hallucinate a snake because they have predisposed evolutionary underpinnings to recognize, certain shapes is kind of like what I'm after.
Right.
And then that explains, in my mind, how people are having these cross-cultural.
No, I think so you mean we all have a predisposition,
right?
A pre-configuration that's common to all primates, and that are more prone to resonate and to get stimulated. I think you're really onto something, Shane. I think that's true. That and that ability to we have that in common. And that's why this shared experience might be so internationally and universally familiar.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that idea because while we're talking about these sort of like universalizing experiences, I also want to go back to what Tara was saying in that like you can have a psychedelic experience and tap into a better consciousness fit, let's say, or a better template fit. And then that might actually cause someone, it's easy to think of examples of when that causes someone to, rather than accept that this is a universal experience and can be then brought back into one's own culture, but like reaching out into another's culture. Sometimes this looks like cultural appropriation. Sometimes this looks like being invited into an emergent religious or spiritual group or an indigenous group. But like, why do we have these? I'm really interested in why do we both have these experiences that could be thought of as maybe universal, but then this draw to like find that resonance in a culture that is not our own, rather than like looking at our own culture for those resonances. And also, there's such a focus on, at least in the Western psychedelic landscape, of like these individual experiences, and in which, you know, I have now a new consciousness fit, and I'm going to make all these changes in my life eventually, probably, hopefully slowly, and then I will have a better life and just higher quality of life. When we talk a lot less about the ways in which the cultures and communities that surround us may or may not hamper that process, and what effect that has on the people around us, whether or not they're participating in these psychedelic experiences.
Yeah, and then we'll take some questions, maybe.
Yeah, only to follow the path of the argument. Also, I want to highlight that every individual in the world has metaphysical inputs.
Every what in the world?
Every individual in the world has metaphysical inputs. I don't like the word because it's a very technical one and it's a weird, but it's the term that describes better, right? Because of course we can use synonyms, religion, spirit, spiritual, and so on. But when you are developing a comparative history of religions, or if you are trying to develop psychedelic assisted therapy, right? When you are facing patients, every patient has a cultural background. And for example, if you are a psychedelic assisted therapist in Mexico, the 80% of the patients that you will be, supporting will be Catholics, right? And so, for example, the images displayed during the psychedelic experience doesn't have the same meaning. For example, it's not the same, for example, if you see the Virgin Mary, if you are a Catholic, than if you are an atheist, right? So every person has metaphysical inputs. One overlooked issue in the psychedelic sphere is the psychedelic hermeneutics, okay? How to interpret the psychedelic experience. This is the same thing that psychoanalysis, does with the dreams, right? In the realm of psychedelic studies, one interesting question is how to interpret. And this has two layers. Of course, as an individual experience some psychedelics, you interpret the experience. On the other hand, the therapist, your friends, or the people that are, around you when you had the experience and you share, hey, what did you see? Oh man, I see this, that, and so on and so on. And you start to verbalize, right? The experience, for sure. There are some indigenous traditions that, for example, share the visions that you had during the experience is not allowed, because you have to spend 4 days for a revelation in dreams, right? After for example, in the Mazatec culture, you have the velada, and you are not allowed to share with the other people what did you see. You have to wait to dreams, right? To receive the message to dream. In other indigenous traditions or in the Western world, this is not the case.
That seems like such a useful.
Yeah.
That must have developed over time with shamans like, actually, you don't get to tell me your crap.
Yeah.
Give it like 4 days. If you still remember something, I'll listen to it.
On the other hand, for example, psychedelic assisted therapy is not possible without verbalizing. What happens if you go to the psychedelic assisted therapy at the end of the season, at the end of the, the day you say, oh, I don't want to share, I don't want to say anything. Right?
Yeah.
So these metaphysical inputs work, right? And I put 2 examples. One in the Florentine Codex in the 16th century, there is a record of the ancient psilocybin mushroom ritual, and you can see, and you can read the visions. And the visions are culturally situated according to the Aztecs. For example, never mention an elephant, a tiger, right? An animal from India or something like that, right? On the other hand, for example, in the Netflix series of the Michael Pollan, it's very, mainstream. In the chapter on psilocybin, he's interviewing a woman, 70 years old woman with cancer, right? With a terminal illness. And she's sharing that during the psilocybin session, she saw the Virgin Mary, right? And she felt a therapeutic, force with the Virgin Mary because this woman, when she was younger, she lost a baby, right? Or she had an abortion. And she felt relief when the Virgin Mary shared with the woman, don't worry about him, I will take care of him, right? I will take care of your son. And the woman, explained that she felt a relief, right? From the trauma and from the pain, right? But the interpretation of the symbol of the Virgin Mary, right? It's completely different. This is the thing what I mean, that every individual has a metaphysical input, right? Or in other words, culture, right? But I like the word metaphysic because it refers all these spiritual, sacred, right? Entities that it's not easy to describe, that it's not easy to talk about. And also there are not only subject to a mechanical explanation, and of course all these metaphysical inputs are very useful as a person. And as a therapist, if you are a skilled psychedelic assisted therapy, for example, and if you know the different traditions, the different metaphysical inputs, you will be more effective addressing, for example, the visions or the experience of your patients. If you are capable to interpret, it's not easy, these sacred or metaphysical images.
Wonderful. Fascinating conversation. I didn't leave as much time for questions as I'd hoped, but let's get into some. Yeah, in the back, glasses. Yeah, you curly hair.
Thank you. Hello. I want to say thank you, Shane. I went to your tour in 2016 at the larger room, and it sort of set me on a path here. So very appreciative.
Hell yeah.
And following from that, we have a room of scholars. I'm curious if you have any questions for Shane about what comedy or humor has to do with psychedelics, neuroscience, spiritual care, aesthetics, cognitive liberty, philosophy.
Do you have any questions?
I have something that you might appreciate. I've been wondering for the last 2 or 3 years what evolutionary arms race made the human cortex start to grow 500,000 years ago and made it more adaptive and more successful than other primates. It's an unsolved question. I think something is about food or tool use or but what is really the arms race? And my strong suspicion, my theory is that it was based on female sexual selection. That basically the big cortex is a display organ to attract each other. I think it's sexually dimorphic, so both females and male had to grow. And I think what the display was that made us that female selected for was humor. Actually, I think it's humor and art. It's music and humor. So I think the reason why we have evolved this phenomenal cortex is to produce humor. I think it was the original evolutionary pressure. And only 20,000 years ago, once it was fully grown and fully established, or make it 50,000 years ago, did we realize we can also use it for building rockets and developing tools. But I think for 400,000 years, or for 300,000 years, the only thing we used it for was basically to tell jokes. That would be one answer how we can connect that. And psychedelics, I would say, can maybe amplify this ability to use your imagination and be more creative.
I would say that both psychedelics, comedy, psychedelics, and science fundamentally have one big thing in common, which is kind of like this alien anthropologist point of view. So scientists are often trying to look at a behavior and be like, okay, we assume if you ask someone to self-report why they behaved in this way, why they made this choice, they give one answer. But we can kind of, if you think about an alien coming down and observing this behavior more objectively, what might they make of it? And we do this when we look at animals. Comedians do this exact same thing, which is you go like, hey, have you ever noticed this? Stairs are crazy. And it's the same sort of thing. You're looking at something that everyone walks past every day, and then you have a different point of view on it. And psychedelics are similar, but almost the opposite in that they force a different perspective. You might gobble the thing because you listened to Andrew Huberman and you liked his biceps or something like that, and then holy shit, you just got this new point of view on things. I think that's a correlation. But yeah, the idea of evolutionarily advertising your ability to not have succumbed to brain parasites, which seems like people are doing just fine with brain parasites and gaining plenty of status these days. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm just super interested in the dynamicism that psychedelics has between breaking down your frameworks that you currently have, allowing yourself as more of an input machine rather than coming with your implicit biases, but also when you talk about setting and the experience, the setting up before having the trip itself, and how it can lead sort of in a deterministic way, depending on your goals, to a particular enlightening experience. You know, some people will take shrooms for the purpose of feeling at ease with the current situation or a conflict going on within their life. And so I wonder, especially when you talk about the metaphor of the blizzard and blurring the lines of the paths in which your mind can take, and then also what you talked about with the attractive states that your mind is currently in, if there is a degree of determinism that you have control over when ingesting these drugs and saying, hey, I want to have this outcome with this drug, because I feel like it's kind of an interesting dichotomy between, you know, where the pharmacology and how it works at the neural level as well, and how it makes you more suggestible and stuff, but then also it can give you very specific outcomes. And so I wonder where you think that integration takes place.
Tara, could you maybe talk about some set and setting type stuff and integration?
I'd be so happy to. I think that question really gets at this idea of set and setting. What is the mindset that you're coming into the trip experience with, and what is the setting in which it's taking place? So unfortunately, the clinic where we work, we have such little control over the setting because it is such a medicalized context. We still are able to do some tweaking, you know, encouraging people to bring eye masks, thinking about the music playlist that they might be listening to, thinking about, you know, what are they wearing, how might they just feel comfortable and set in the setting that they're in. And then this question we actually often get from patients of, I want to have X. I want to have this kind of outcome. I have these expectations coming into the treatment. And we'll often explore what those are, right? It's, I think, being super curious about what is it that you're hoping for, and then doing a lot of expectation setting to say, be open, be curious. This is a non-specific amplifier, so what comes will come, and we may not have all that much control over what is occurring treatment to treatment. So I'll give one example. One of our patients, and I'll keep it pretty vague, had an experience of body dysmorphia during one of her treatment experiences. So she had this experience of, because of this dissociative state, she was sort of over her body, watching the body dysmorphia happen upon her. And it was a particularly painful experience to have. And, we've had other patients who have felt held in the experience. They felt totally weightless. And these might be patients who come from particularly traumatic backgrounds. And so the idea of feeling a mother's arms around you might not be something that they have had that experience of. And wow, what might happen over the course of that experience of, this is what it feels like to be held, and how do you integrate that experience of being held in a way that continues to promote wellness? So lots of different ways that this might come up in terms of what is your intention for the treatment, and how do you let go when that intention does not bear fruit in the way that you want it to. And then the last thing I'll say about this is, whatever does come of the experience, we work with our patients to think about, how do you make meaning, and how do you decide what not to make meaning out of, right? There are times that there are experiences in the trip experience where you say, I actually don't want to press more into that. I don't want to look more deeply into that for XYZ reasons, and we can talk about those reasons, and we might want to look at that later on, but feeling comfortable to say, this is a meaning-making experience, and also we don't have to make meaning out of this if that's not going to be fruitful and conducive to your journey of wellness.
It is so hard to find that balance. They're setting an intention, but without expectations and all of that. I helped out with some mushroom retreats in Jamaica years ago, just I like doing silly shit, and I have no business doing it. But there was this guy that came with his kid. He was like, he had never done a psychedelic before and heard all the hubbub and wanted to try it out. And he kept on, it was like 3 mushroom trips over 8 days or something like that. And he kept on having seeming like he was having a nice time while he was tripping. And then the next day talking about it, he'd be like so disappointed that he wasn't like getting what he was supposed to be getting. And then he kept on being like, what about the bad trip? We thought he was worried about having a bad trip. And then we found out he was upset because he wasn't having a bad trip because he had heard that having a difficult trip is where all the answers come from, and that's what's going to rebuild yourself. So he kept on having an enjoyable experience and being like, I didn't pay for this. And so it's really it's tricky to know exactly what you're going to get out of any experience. One more?
Yeah, thanks. Great job. Amazing panel. Thank you. This is amazing. One thread that kept popping its head up over the course of this panel is this sort of ghost of mind-body dualism. Is the mind the brain? The material kind of bases of our experience. On one hand, I feel like a lot of people who do psychedelics tend to experience such powerful, unbelievable things that they lend themselves towards a belief in some kind of, spirit, mind, something or other. Get in touch with metaphysics, get in touch with, the idea, capital I, whatever. On the other hand, it seems like quite likely that the brain is the mind, and that's just that. Maybe but in dialogue with the wider world, and the stretching of the wider world, the stretching of the social or something pulls us out. So I guess I'd be interested if we could get, from all 4 of you, ideally, even just some, 1 paragraph essay at whatever you personally think is the relationship between, the brain and the imagination, brain and the mind, brain and the world, brain and some kind of idea, spirit, whatever it might be. I'd be very curious at whatever your kind of We best grasp things up.
No difference, all the difference, somewhere in between.
Oh, that's good.
I was, do you want to ask? I was half joking. Yeah, but well, let's go.
I think what I just want to point right off that is on the spectrum of woo, right, where 0 is hardcore materialist, deterministic universe, nothing exists but the philosophy, and 7 being I'm a butterfly having a human experience, and soon I'll return to the Godhead. Where would each of you guys place yourselves on this spectrum? From
Just one question. What do you mean deterministic?
Yeah.
Or predetermined, as in, everything is based off of laws of thermodynamics and Newtonian.
Okay, thank you. That doesn't mean deterministic, right? There's huge amounts of stochasticity and chance in there.
Yeah,
just
so,
wanna-
no, just but in the general sense of.
But based at so I would say if 0 is the brain, is the mind, and it's all explainable based on Newtonian and thermodynamics and Maxwell, that would be me.
Okay, I want to answer this. There is a synergy between, I am an atheist, okay? First of all. There is a synergy between the material and the physical aspect of the mind and the body of the world, right? And I agree with this material aspect. My philosophical trend is materialism, right? But on the other hand, in order to be a naive position, it's a problem of the ghost in the machine, right? And for example, in Descartes, there is no solution. Descartes split the problem of the mind and body, right? And I guess that the way in which, for the last 500 years, we are dealing with this issue, it's a mess, right? Because the material and the spiritual parts in a human being come together, right? Of course, all these metaphysical or spiritual aspects sometimes are not universal, but it's not possible to deny. Because, for example, in the case of psychedelic-assisted therapy, for example, not everything is physiology or pharmacology. There are psychological aspects, because these are the nuances, right? There is a discipline as psychology that is not neuroscience, but it's not philosophy also, right? Yeah. So this is the thing that I want to highlight. Psychology is in the middle, right? And psychology takes into account the material aspects, but other aspects that are not material, right? And there are several names, right? Complex, syndromes, hallucination, cultural bound syndromes, right? And for several years, centuries, for example, the Western society tried to avoid metaphysics, right? And I understand why, and I mostly agree. But also as a philosopher, for example, I say that this is a useful effort because as these memes, we throw metaphysics, right? And suddenly metaphysics appears behind us. We are spiritual animals. We are metaphysical animals also, right? And we have to take into account this, in spite of the fact that for example, my start point is a material, right?
The question is, can we converge? Can we synergize all of these disciplines into a kind of unified discipline that is ultimately based on the laws of the physical laws of the universe?
Yeah, sure.
That's the question. I think materialism maybe is hampered by the fact that we think it's about matter, and it ignores something like electric fields, right? Electromagnetic fields.
Yeah.
But neuroscience does not. Neuroscience includes electromagnetic fields. Neuroscience is the combination of all of these basic physical laws. I think my ultimate dream is, or goal is to synergize and bring them all together into a framework. And I think that's possible, is to really ultimately reduce it onto these fundamental laws that govern, and those fundamental laws are explained. Those are the laws of physics and that are very well described, of physics, chemistry, and biology. That's my
Yeah.
hope, that we can synergize and bring those things together.
We have 4 concepts, only to bring that it's necessary to address, you know, for example. The first one is brain. We have brain. We have mind, right? We have soul, and we have a spirit. We have and consciousness, right? No, it's for psychedelic research, for sure. It's for example, to enhance the framework. So, for example, in the field of neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy, these 5 terms are very important because usually, for example, they have been used as synonyms, right? But there are several nuances that it's necessary to take into account because it's not the same, the knowledge of the brain, that the knowledge of the self, right?
It's not the same.
Yeah, it's not the same.
Well, I say it could be the same. I think you can synergize. That's what I mean by synergize, that I can give you a neuroscience definition, operational definition of all of your 5 concepts. I can explain the soul, I can explain the mind, I can explain the conscious experience in the framework of neuroscience. I'm not sure I'm there yet, but I think that's a goal and it's possible to achieve.
If we have 5 more minutes, we would definitely settle this total. And see which side has more of a replication crisis. But we need to wrap up. Tristan, you have what's your documentary?
Oh, Integrate Me.
Integrate Me.
Yeah.
You have some other stuff you want to plug? Anyone else have things that other people can check out?
Sure, I'm always happy to plug my documentary, Integrate Me, as well as the CSWR Psychedelics reading group. This year it's on psychedelics and aesthetics, but it'll be booting up again next year with a whole new concept. So I invite you to take part in that, as well as any of the other psychedelic events put on by Mahindra or CSWR, or I'm forgetting the last name. Petrie Flom. A lot of really exciting events happening at Harvard around psychedelics. So.
Anyone else? Okay.
I'll quickly plug Paul Gillis-Smith in the audience, who was my first student in the ketamine clinic. So if you want more case studies or thoughts on this work, great person to talk to.
Well, how about a hand for all our panel? Thank you guys for coming out. Chase, we're starting in like, what, 15 minutes or
About
something
15
like
minutes,
that?
we'll
Are
begin
the
with
other
the
guys
comedy
here?
show.
There's like a couple other people. And
Wonderful.
Comedy.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Again.
So much in common.
I always want to see that. Sebastian. This is Sebastian.
Yeah, I remember him from Tuesday.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. Hi. Take care. He told me about your project. Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about it. What are you thinking for?
How I'm doing it or what I'm questioning?
I don't know the thing that I
So basically, the questions of how new cultures are emerging. How do you navigate that? Cultural exchange, cross culture, in a way where you can enrich your own culture without, while cultural appropriation versus cultural influence. So just question where do you find in the new psychology judge what is a respectful integration versus appropriation? Okay, so most of this is from usually the interview from most of this is 30 minutes.
And which is your goal or the output that you have to deliver for the project?
So it's a push ethnography report. This stuff is like different unfounding, which is an old there's something to look at that who agree to project local practice. So kind of talk to their so it's this idea of exploring, can we find these ways, these models of developing culture?
Thank you all so much for attending. This will be the end of the live show. Again, my name is Chase Bourbon. I am president of the Harvard Undergraduate Psychedelics Club. We'll be doing more programming like this in the future, and we'll be sure to share it with all the sources. A big shout out again to Psychedelics Today, Psychedelics USA, SSDP for getting this live, and Mahindra Humanities Center and Mogu based out of LA. Huge players in this. We really appreciate you saying bye. Thanks.
How many people were on the stream?